Welcome back to the Blue Sofa Talks. I'm excited to introduce our next guest, Zahra Makki. Welcome to the Blue Sofa Talks. I'm your host, Fatima Al-Zain. On this show, we aim to bring females and women from our community who will share their stories and experiences. This show is really about just getting comfortable, sitting down, having our TMJ coffee, and chatting about the important things, the controversial things, or just the things that really go through our minds. Zahra, I know you from online only. This is our first in-person meeting, actually. Yeah. You moved to Lebanon. You live there now with your husband and your daughter, which is so beautiful. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about, your transition from here to Lebanon, your transition into motherhood, and your transitions in life, and traumatic, the traumas that we go through life. Mm-hmm. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here, inshallah.
And we're very excited to have you, honestly. It's a pleasure that we got to, and you made time for this interview.
I'm a big fan of TMJ, so thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. So Zahra, can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up?
Yeah. I grew up in Dearborn like everyone else. I grew up in Dearborn, so you have the classic Dearborn upbringing. Mm-hmm. My parents are both Lebanese immigrants. Mm-hmm. So we came here when I was 4 months. Mm-hmm. So I was raised here all my life. And Dearborn is very comfortable, maybe too comfortable.
Because it's so small.
It's very small, and you're surrounded by a lot of the same people, mm-hmm. people that think like you, people mm-hmm. that look like you. And so in that sense, alhamdulillah, that helped with building a Arab identity, an Islamic mm-hmm. identity, a cultural identity. Mm-hmm. But at some point, you need to know when that becomes a limitation.
Yeah.
And so I always knew that Dearborn wouldn't be the place I was forever. So that was always kind of in the back of my mind. And
I never thought ever that I would come and live here, so.
Are you from Canada?
Yes.
Toronto, Ontario,
yeah,
London. Toronto. Okay.
Yeah.
You guys have a very big community there as well.
Yeah,
Lebanese community.
It is. It's nice. But you never think that you're going to be living somewhere else, right?
That's very true. Mm-hmm. I think no matter what I did or where I went, if I went off to school or if I moved anywhere else, mm-hmm. I always thought Dearborn is the place you come back. Dearborn is the nest. It's the home. It's where mm-hmm. family is. So I have a very strong love for the community here. Mm-hmm. And wherever I go or wherever I end up, I always call Dearborn home. Mm-hmm. So alhamdulillah, there's that sense of connection to the community. I grew up in a family that really tried to bring the values, the principles that they had back home mm-hmm. into our homes. And mm-hmm. so we had the love of the Arabic language ingrained. We had Arabic teachers, Quran teachers. So alhamdulillah, my parents really tried to underscore mm-hmm. these values in our homes. And I think a lot of us have had that similar experience in Dearborn.
And it's so beautiful because my family is just like that, Our first language in the house was Arabic. Mm-hmm. And anyone who meets us is like, wow, you speak Arabic very well, for someone who lives in the West or someone who lives outside. So that's very beautiful that you said that. How was your transition from going from living in the Lebanon of the US, right? to living in Lebanon, mm-hmm. right? And also studying there. I think that's very, very different.
It was a big transition. Mm-hmm. I didn't really have a connection to Lebanon throughout my upbringing. I think I had visited twice or 3 times mm-hmm. my entire life before moving there. And it was only for a vacation. So mm-hmm. it wasn't this ongoing connection every summer with Lebanon. And so when I moved there, it was kind of like a culture shock for me. I was really, really astounded by the people, by the culture, by just how different everything felt. Mm. It's definitely not like Dearborn. So for me, I always thought Lebanon was just kind of an extension of that. It wasn't in my experience, mm-hmm. Especially because when we moved there, I lived in the village. So I didn't mm-hmm. move to Beirut. I actually moved to the south. Mm-hmm. And so my home was a valley. Mm-hmm. And I would open and there would just be mountains and the sun.
But that sounds like a dream to everyone.
It is a dream. It is a dream. Mm-hmm. So in the sense of the living, in the sense of the environment, in the sense of the solitude and just having time to yourself and really stepping outside of your comfort zone, Lebanon really offered that to me.
Is it as fast-paced as life is here?
No, that's one of the biggest differences between Lebanon, maybe even the East in general, and here, the West, is that you have the freedom to pursue life in all of its wholeness. And so you have nature, you have community, you have religion, you have school, you have your home. And you can take it as slow as you want because people don't expect you to meet a certain standard of living or a certain standard of climbing the corporate ladder or whatever. It's you live life on your own terms, and especially living in the village, you have more of that kind of isolation. And so you have more of that freedom to choose what is a part of your life and what isn't.
And that's so beautiful because it really helps you to grow as a person and know what's important to you and what isn't.
Absolutely.
We often find ourselves running, trying to do everything in the household, trying to, finish all the work you have, and you're always just running.
I think from early on, I would read like Henry David Thoreau, and I'd read Emerson, and I don't know if you've watched the movie Into the Wild, but these were all kind of
seen things of it.
Episodes of trying to depart from the society that you knew in order to experience yourself, experience nature. And so I always had that ideal. Following through with that ideal was such a dream. I really romanticized it, even though it came with so much hardship and so much suffering, because at the end of the day, you're away from your family, and I'm very close to my family, and you're away from your community and everything that's familiar, and your university and your familiar mosques, and everything was just different.
And you're speaking to every single woman who has gotten married and moved away from her family.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So
even speaking to our mothers and their experiences.
SubhanAllah, for my parents, it's really surreal because they left their entire families behind to come to America, to come to Dearborn, to create a life for us.
And then to have you just go back.
And then to have me go back.
Zahra.
Yeah, it was something they had a lot of trouble grappling with. They wanted me home, obviously, but I think we all go through this when it comes to staying in the nest or expanding your horizons and realizing that there might be more opportunity or more opportunities for growth elsewhere, even if it means you're going to be uncomfortable. Yeah. And I knew that was part of the equation, but it did take a while to adjust. That's just natural. In the East, you don't have the electricity, you don't have the water, you don't have the ease of access to everything we have here is absent in Lebanon.
And it's so interesting because a lot of people, I think our families and our parents, especially our mothers, can speak to this healing journey, right? This like journey of healing their aching hearts, healing their families who are far away, and then healing their minds and their body and their soul in the environments that they're living in order to start living again and again and again, right?
Yeah. It's a process. It's not a switch. It really takes time. So I would say that I've been in Lebanon for the past 6 years. Like you said, I studied there. I transferred from my university here in the States to the university back in Lebanon, which was an American university.
People usually transfer from Lebanon to here in order to be able to work here.
Exactly.
So you just did everything opposite.
So I just did everything the other way. Worked out great. So I had to find a university that would be an American university, an American degree. So my university was back in the city, in Beirut.
It's a long drive, like
a very long drive. Yeah. So you're talking about an hour and a half in very calm conditions. Yeah. During rush hour, you're talking about 2 hours.
2 hours.
So the initial idea was, my close ones, people were looking at this journey that I was about to embark on, and they're saying it's impossible. You're getting married young. You're trying to seek out an education. You're trying to reconcile between being someone who has an education and being someone that gets married and settles down. And you're trying to do that at a young age. And so there was this false dichotomy, I guess, that you can say people were kind of making me choose between. And I kept saying it was possible. It was possible. So moving to Lebanon, there was this pressure to, really show that it is possible. So my university was in Beirut. It was in the city. My home was in the village. And I had to commute there every single time I had class and come back up. So you're talking about a lot of the times it would be between 4 to 5 hours a day of commuting for the days, for just in the car.
Wow.
So it was extremely, extremely
And it's not like you can sit and read. No. Relax. It's like you're driving and you're actually aware and on the road.
Anyone who has driven in Lebanon, it's not one of those midnight drives that you're cruising and things are good. you are in a battlefield
constantly
playing
every day.
Tetris with your car,
trying
to make sure that you get to your destination unscathed. And I guess this kind of goes into my near-death experience that I had, that you mentioned.
Is it difficult to talk about?
It's surreal. It's not too difficult to recall because I see it as an opportunity, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. And I'm very thankful that you are speaking about this, because it's something that a lot of people go through and are unable to really, bring those feelings and thoughts into words. So if you can tell us a little bit about that experience and what you felt at the beginning, what you thought was going to be, and how that completely changed.
So just a trigger warning for anyone who's gone through a near-death experience, because it's really hard. And I don't think that I had the words to talk about it for a long time, because this happened about 4 years ago. So I think just in retrospect, you kind of learn how to process your experience. For me, I think, so what happened was I was on the way to school.
Like normal.
Like always. On the way back, it was about 6, 7 p.m. I was almost home. It was about 2 hours of driving. I was almost home. My husband asked me to stop for some milk. Stopped real quick, grabbed some milk from the store. I was about 3 minutes away from home. And I threw the milk in the back seat, came into my car, did my classic U-turn. And this was a highway, so it wasn't a street setting. You're going very fast, it's a very expedited road. So any accident on that road is going to be a very tough
And people
accident.
don't really follow the speed limits.
Right.
Properly. So it's like whatever's fast is even faster. On
exactly.
The roads.
So Lebanon doesn't really have much driving laws. People don't follow them. There's no red lights. There's no stop signs. There's nothing like that.
There's honking.
Yes, there's honking. So I've actually stopped on a red light in the downtown where there is red lights, and I was beeped at by a police officer for stopping. So there's no driving laws there. So it's really, so for a lot of people it's really difficult to drive, and it's extremely stressful. So I made my U-turn. I'm almost home. I'm driving, and the road was relatively empty. It was about 7 p.m. I was in the far right lane. And the thing with Lebanon is that they have stores along the highway. So it's not like America where in like the stores you have to take an exit.
No, but
there's like directly a store.
Out.
Exactly. So there was a car in the far left lane. I was in the right lane. It was only me and him on the road. And he had a left signal to kind of take a U-turn. I was just kind of going straight still. And all of a sudden, the car took a sharp right turn, 3 lanes, into trying to go into a store. At that point, I was extremely close to his car that he couldn't even see me. Wow. So the impact was very strong. I noticed what was happening. And 3 seconds prior, I beeped my car. Like I remember I slammed my horn, and I was slamming my brakes at the same time. But I knew it was too late. It was very obvious to me it was too late. And in that moment, my entire body tensed. My mouth went extremely dry. The physiological response, subhanAllah, just happens in a moment. You just freeze. Yeah. And the car is impacted. Alhamdulillah, my car, the way it had happened, where he was unaffected, but it was really me that had the impact. So the first impact was
because it came on your side.
Exactly. So that happened, and then my car was continuing to spiral. So that was the first impact.
Were you still aware when it was spiraling?
I was out of control. So my head kind of went into the steering wheel. That was the first impact, and then I had no control over the car. It was really, really fast. And then the second impact was into an electric pole, and then that really stopped the car. I remember peeling my head away from the steering wheel, and I was very, very, I think I was concussed at that point. I didn't know what was happening. I saw the windshield kind of break, and I just peeled my head away, and I didn't know what was going on. But my first instinct was to just grab my scarf and make sure it was in place. And it was such a intuitive instinct to just really make sure my hijab was on properly, because it had gone back a bit. Yeah. I didn't scream. I wasn't yelling. I remember I just whispered, "Oh my God," as my car was about to hit into everything. And I was just whispering, "Ya Zahra, Ya Zahra." But that was it. I just felt okay, life was over, because there was nothing you could do to stop it. So being in that very vulnerable, helpless position, and just knowing that there's nothing you can do differently, it's done. Your time is done. It took me a long time to come out of that state, because I realized how futile this world was.
Yeah.
And I didn't think like my life was just so dispensable.
I think we all think that we're infinite.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're speaking someone who did go through, an experience similar where like car accidents are always traumatic. Not as intense as yours, but it was me and my whole family in the same car, which put an added stress in the household, right? So it's difficult to go through it alone. And it's even more difficult to go through it with others who are going through it.
I'm so grateful that there was no one else in the car.
Honestly.
Alhamdulillah.
It's very hard.
I can imagine how hard that was for your family to process.
How hard was it for you to process the situation that you were in afterwards?
I think I was in
What happened afterwards?
shock.
Like, what happened to you?
Yeah, a bunch of people, like 40, 50 men just crowded around my car suddenly. So there was no woman. It was really, really scary because there was no familiar faces and you're bleeding from places you don't know. And there was an ambulance. Like it kind of all happened really fast. And they opened the car door and they wanted to lift me up. And I just felt like I don't want to be touched. I don't know anyone here. I felt really scared. There was a bunch of older looking people just kind of crowding. And because it was my husband's dayha, or his village, they knew kind of who I was. And so they gave him a call and they told him, your wife's had an accident. So he was at home waiting for me. He had the TV on, like everything was ready. We were just going to have dinner together. So for him, he was absolutely shocked. So the way he described his experience was he was running. He just ran to the street, to the highway, because our home was close by. He ran for time. And then I was in the ambulance at that point, and I kept telling them, please don't leave. My husband's coming. Please don't leave. My husband's coming. And he finally got there, but he saw the car before he saw me. And if you see the car, you would think that whoever was in this car is done. Yeah, exactly. My car was in pieces. So he nearly dropped. He was like, where is the driver? Where's the driver? So he came and he saw me, and I was wearing a white shirt at the time, so the blood was just everywhere. God. So haram, it wasn't as bad as it looked. My foot was like twisted to one side, and so he got very pale. So his experience as well, like a loved one going through another loved one's near-death experience, is really, really hard to navigate. So that was the aftermath of it. That was a short-lived aftermath, because after that I couldn't walk for a couple of weeks. Yeah,
it's okay. Alhamdulillah that you're on the other side now.
Absolutely. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah for
it's
everything.
A blessing. No,
you feel like when you look at these situations, you look at it like Allah saved me.
That morning I was leaving the house. It was about 5:30 in the morning. And when I leave the house to go to uni, I have my backpack and my lunchbox and my purse and there's so much that I'm carrying, and I just need to get to the car ASAP. And I was running really late.
Yeah.
So I was about to leave the house, and I had one foot out the door and one foot inside. I was about to leave, and I just had this feeling like, let me just put a sadaqah. Let me just give charity real quick. And I didn't think much of it. Like I didn't even think it wasn't this feeling. Like it was just let me just give charity real quick. And I've never done that
and
before.
And that's something I think that most people do when they are leaving the house.
Exactly.
Right? Like you do that when you're leaving the house, when you need to go somewhere. Even like just
small distances,
small things that for protection, and you don't think much of it.
You don't think anything of it. And for me, what was interesting was I was really late, and I'd never come back from being outside the house to come back in to put a charity. That was
something
the difference.
Reminded you.
But I was like, let me just I didn't even think much of it. I was like, let me just put charity before I leave, and I put like $1. Like it wasn't much, and I left the house that day. I think that saved me. I think that charity saved me, because we know from our tradition, charity changes your destiny.
Yeah.
So subhanallah, you don't know.
Even the smallest bit that you can help someone.
Know. You don't know the value of that in the spiritual realm, the value of that charity. So
how was your mental healing? And did it go along with your physical healing?
It took me a while to get back mentally on track, because I realized in those moments how temporary life is, how fragile life is, and especially your life, because you always think, people are dying every day, but you always think that I'm going to be the exception. I'm going to have the doctors know. I'm going to have the feeling in my heart. I'm going to have the dream that something's going to happen or whatever. You always think that you're the exception to this death equation. But that experience showed me just how dispensable your life is. And in a sense, it just shows you how unworthy this life is, because it just goes. One day you're here and one day you're not. And so really to deep that, like as an actual experience, was very, very hard. So it took a while.
How do you live with death in mind every day?
The Holy Prophet used to tell the people, "Uthkuru hadim al-laddat." Remember the thing which destroys pleasures. And he said, what is that? Oh, Rasulullah. And he says, dhikrul maut, remembering death. To remember that thing which destroys your illusion of love of the world, to remember that thing which makes you remember that you're not infinite, and that each day you really have to live like it's your last, because who you anger, who you upset, who you hurt in this life, you don't know if you're ever going to have the opportunity to rectify the mistakes that you've made with others or the mistakes you've made towards yourself. So remembering death comes in so many forms. And I think we've had so many reminders around us. I think we just avoid the remembrance. It's not like the remembrance isn't around us.
We've numbed ourselves to it.
Yeah, we have. So I remember one of the things that I love to do the most is visiting the cemetery. And it's a practice, I think, for a lot of us. Like on Eid, we visit the cemetery. You know, my parents always like to go to the funerals of people that have passed. And I think that's part of, alhamdulillah, that's part of our community, but it's also extremely emphasized in our tradition. Those, I think, really, really ingrain and help the child remember that death is coming. And then just the spirit of Shahr Ramadan, when you're reading Dua Kumail, when you're reading Dua Abu Hamza, when you're reading Dua Jawshan, and you're saying, relief, help us and save us from the fire, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's this constant reminder. Or in Abu Hamza, when he's talking about his state in the grave, and he says, why would I not cry? Why would I not weep when I know this is going to be my state? So our tradition is replete with supplications that really underscore the remembrance of death. It's just we don't want to kind of experience that remembrance because of how much it would shock our routines and shock our autopilot mode and shock the way in which we interact with people, the way we interact with ourselves, the way we interact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Do you think people would be better versions of themselves if they did remember death?
Absolutely. It's not this morbid reminder where you're just depressed because you're remembering you're going to die.
And that's what people envision it to be, right?
No, it's the best state of living, because once you know that your days are short-lived, that your time here is temporary, that you're living for a soul that long precedes your body. You know, we have this illusion that we're infinite, but in fact we're infinite, but just not infinitely embodied. We're just infinitely souls. And so shifting its remembrance of death is just shifting the idea that I'm this body that's going to live forever to this, I'm this soul that's going to live forever. And so it's not a morbid reminder. It's a reminder that really animates you differently, because you're living from within at that point. You're living truly, everything is full and wholesome, because things don't bother you as much because you know they're short-lived. The people you love don't bother you that much because you know in any second you could lose them or you could be gone. So the way your attitude towards life just becomes a lot more positive and optimistic, ironically, when you remember death more.
That's so interesting. It brings a thought to mind. Was it more valuable to you having your daughter after this experience rather than having her before? Like becoming a mother after living this kind of an experience. You know, motherhood in itself is difficult. I remember if I ever went out, I'd be like to my husband, what if I don't come back? You know, what if I don't come back to him? What if I'm not able, like, what if something happens to me? Like, what are you guys going to do? What if something happens to you? So having lived this kind of an experience, how did that inform, you know, that kind of your motherhood, the way that you mother, and the way you would have differently? Like, what did you do differently in life?
I think when you remember death more, you become a lot more present. The way which we live our lives. So motherhood, I think, is actually a good parallel to dying. Yeah, it's gonna sound a bit ironic. It's a very good parallel to dying, because, you know, motherhood.
I feel like everyone who is watching the Blue Sofa Talks is gonna be like, oh my God, this is all talking about how motherhood is so bad. No, it's beautiful.
Oh, no.
It's a beautiful experience.
That's not a bad thing, actually.
Yes.
Let me explain. It's in the sense that you're dying to certain things, certain experiences that you're going to have. You're removing and filtering through a lot of noise in life when you become a mother, because you start to realize what's important.
That's true.
You start to prioritize differently. And so when I had my daughter Yasmin, there was everywhere around me, everywhere you look, social media, the life that you live, the community that you're around, everything is trying to tug at your attention. Everything is trying to say, I'm important, I'm important. Filtering through that noise is very difficult. And when you have a child, it becomes a lot more easy because you become a lot more focused and you start to realize what truly matters. And so when I had my daughter Yasmin, all I wanted to be was in her presence. All I wanted to be was present, because I realized that everything else was just this feeling of importance. But what I was doing and what I was living with her was an experience of importance. It was truly important. So with Yasmin, I really take things day by day. And I think really that's what it means to celebrate life, is to just know, like, focus, take things day by day, appreciate where you are every moment, and filter through what doesn't matter. Having a child really helps you do that. Also, remembering death really helps you do that. It helps you filter through all the noise and everything that's trying to tug at your attention, because attention is the biggest commodity in our age. Everyone wants your attention.
That's true.
Having that sort of filter really helps you be present, and it makes you so much more grateful that you're actually able to realize what's important in life.
Alhamdulillah. That's such a beautiful way to put it. From people around me and close, like people close to me, I've seen severe physical injuries where they're bedridden for a while and they can't get up and walk. They can't do normal day-to-day activities. They need someone to bathe them. They need someone to help them through things. How was that experience for you in terms of letting others help you and not being that caregiver?
Yeah, I have a really hard time accepting help generally in life. So being in a state where I was extremely vulnerable was very, very hard. Um, I remember that about like a week in, I had an appointment at the hospital, and people were like, "Oh, you're gonna go into a car right after your accident. Like, how do you feel about that?" And I purposely remembered, like, to just shield myself from even thinking about that. And I said, I'm gonna get into a car and I'm not gonna think about it, and it's gonna be okay. And I think we all have our different ways of dealing with trauma or PTSD, whatever traumatic event we went through. But for me, I knew that the mind is a very, very powerful entity, and it will consume what you offer it. And so I purposely and intentionally kind of stayed away from looking at PTSD and like kind of engaging PTSD and, not getting into a car and just thinking that this was something that's going to change my life in a way that's very negative forever. So I told myself, I'm not going to engage in those thoughts. I'm just going to go on, as someone that's gone through something very, very difficult, physically, mentally, in so many different ways. But I'm not going to indulge further thoughts that are only going to debilitate me. And so I knew when to kind of stop thinking about certain things where I would spiral down and just become extremely depressed, because it was a very, very difficult experience. And so I intentionally got back into a car. And just a couple weeks later, when I was okay again, I intentionally started driving again, because I knew the longer I delayed these processes, the harder it would become, because it would be a thing in my mind. So that was my personal way of dealing with it. As for the state of being vulnerable, I think one thing that really helped me was I really leaned on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I really leaned on spiritual strength, because I couldn't lean on my physical strength. And a lot of times when we're debilitated physically, when we're weak physically, we think we're just weak. But we forget that there are other avenues of strength within us, because we're not just a body, we're a soul, we're a mind. Yeah. And to lean on those other avenues of strength when you feel very weak physically is going to be your saving grace. Yeah. And so I tried to lean on the mental. I tried to lean on the spiritual, and mostly on the spiritual, because even mental, I was really struggling. So spiritually, I just tried to remember. I remember that night we came back, my husband and I, after my accident, and we put Najat Shabaniya, because it was Shaban. And the way we experienced that dua was very, very different, because we felt extremely vulnerable, both of us. And we really leaned on the fact that it was Shaban, Ramadan was coming, to just remember our humility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That episode of remembrance helped fuel me mentally and physically, because 3 weeks later I had finals at school.
Did you still go?
Yeah, I went on my crutches. My husband at that point was traveling, so I was actually alone. Sure. So I had my crutches.
Did you have like family, friends helping?
I was completely on my own. Wow. It was my first year in Lebanon, so we don't have family there, both sides. And we were just kind of getting to know people at that point. So
And
I
that
had
puts
to,
an extra weight on like, I remember the scene that you mentioned when you were calling out for them to just let your husband come,
yeah,
because he's the only person who you're familiar with. He's the person that you know.
exactly.
He's the person that's going to help.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, when you're in a situation where you're very isolated from other people and other families, maybe because you moved or you started a new job or whatever, you really have to rely on the strength of the relationship that you have with your spouse, because at that point you guys are each other's backbones. And so alhamdulillah, we had to be each other's backbones in those situations and those trying times.
How were your exams?
Alhamdulillah, actually they went pretty well.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, I was very lucky. I remember
Congratulations on finishing.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
On graduation.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Yeah, my professors were very understanding. So I was able to go 3 weeks later and kind of take my exams. And I realized that would have been impossible if I was in a different state of mind. But I really tried to hone in on that strength and just ignore everything else so that I wouldn't spiral. And I think that's a really important tool. Realizing that not everything that you want to think needs to be thought of so that you don't spiral. So it's one of the most important things that we can have with ourselves, especially in trying situations, is knowing when to stop yourself from thinking about certain things. Especially when you're not in a place to coherently navigate those difficult thoughts. You really want to put a cap on them because you don't have the strength to navigate them at this point.
That's very true.
So you want to abstain from thinking about them. And I think for me, my method of processing at that point was a method of abstinence from certain thoughts.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it really helps to strengthen your well-being, because you're pushing away everything that could deteriorate your mental health, right?
Absolutely. The way that you want to conceive of your body, the way you want to conceive of your mind, the way you want to conceive of your soul are not as separate entities. And this is the false dichotomy that we all live in the West, especially, is my mind wants something, or my heart wants something, my mind wants something else, or my body's in one place, my heart is somewhere else, or my soul and my physical existence. There's always this dichotomy that we pose. But an alternative philosophy that we have within our school of thought is that your body is just an appearance of your soul. It's a station of your soul. And so your existence is one existence. Your mind is not one place. Your heart is not another place. These are just different stations of one existence. And so you're one thing, you're one whole entity. So it's impossible for you to be affected in one area of your life and kind of separate that from your heart or from your mind. And so this interconnectedness of your mind, your body, and your soul is an important thing to remember and realize, because it helps you lean on other aspects of the self when one aspect of the self is weak.
Yeah.
So when you're physically weak, you want to lean on the other aspects.
If you look at it from a different perspective of like your taste, your smell, your eyesight. If you close your eyes, then your scent is heightened, right?
That's a really great example. Exactly. You are one water with different pipes. Yeah. And just remembering that, if I'm not in a place to physically be strong and show up for myself in a bodily way, then if I just hone in my mental state, my spiritual state, that's going to enable me to progress and go on as if I'm okay. This interconnectedness of the self is such an important discussion to be had when it comes to the health of the self, or the health of the human being, is knowing just how one you truly are, especially because the project of the modern world is to fragment you. And so the way in which you live on the bodily plane is very different to the way in which you are in the mosque, which is very different to the way you are in your home, very different to the way you think.
Especially in this society that we live in the West, you feel like you're one way at home. You go out of the house, you're someone else. You're at work, you're someone else. You're at the mosque, you're someone else. Yeah. And you have to like kind of bring up different kind of personas of what is accepted in that zone that you're in, right? Or in that space that you're in.
That speaks to the fragmentation of the self that we all engage in different ways, especially when we lead different lives according to where we are, is because we have this underlying belief that we're different, that my heart is different to my mind, and my mind is different to my body, and my soul is different to everything else. But, our hadith is replete with traditions. For example,
you unite all of
the
those
oneness
together.
of it. That's tawheed. That's unity, is to unite the fragments of the self. It's not always just to say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, Allah is one. It's to become one within yourself. So reflecting that tawheed internally is extremely important. And also because, in my work, I coach women, and a lot of times they would be in a place where maybe mentally they're very down. And my method of approaching that wouldn't be to immediately talk about mental thoughts. It would be to talk about their spiritual heart. It would be to talk about their bodily existence. It would be to talk about maybe you're not feeling well, but what's your sleep like? Do you work out? Do you move your body? Do you read? What do you read? What's your spiritual nutrition
What are you feeding
like?
your soul?
Exactly. So I felt like sometimes it's very hard and heavy for someone to tackle that thing that they're dealing with. Like if you're dealing with something on the mental plane, tackling it directly on the mental plane might be very difficult for you. But maybe if we approach the holistic self and talk about your physical plane and your spiritual plane, that will give you enough strength to then go and talk and navigate your mental plane. And so this interconnectedness is everything when it comes to healing on whatever plane you're struggling with.
Yeah. And that's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Zahra, for your wisdom, for your for sharing and opening up your heart to us today. I know so many people are going to honestly find a lot of value in everything that you've said. I'm grateful.
Thank you so much for having me, for opening this discussion. It was a bit harder than I expected, but I think it was very productive, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. And I really admire everything that you do. So keep doing it. And
Likewise.
I hope that you have a full life.
Habibta, likewise. Bless
Live
you.
with
Thank
your
you so
daughter
much.
and your husband. Inshallah, you have more kids.
Inshallah.
And you build a beautiful legacy, inshallah.
Bless you. Bless you, Fatima.
In this dunya and the hereafter, inshallah.
Habibta, thank you so much. Bless you. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining this episode of the Blue Sofa Talks with Zahra Makki. It was a lovely discussion today. If you guys like this show and you want to support the Blue Sofa Talks, please like and subscribe, and please share. Thank you for listening today. We're here for you.